All right, so we can begin. Does anyone have questions? Seems to have been a pretty active week. Got some good reports from all of you about, uh, from many of you about your meditation experiences from the 3 hour sit. So that's great. And some other developments. Some of you are giving you the instruction to actually not meditate and clean up some conditions in your life. Well, for the meditation fanatics, I've had a couple of you take a break, meditate less, and focus more on the conditions in your life. So if you have questions, raise your hand. Today will mostly be a Q&A, and then we'll just sit in silence until the session period is over. It's also normal for long periods of time to pass before anyone has a question. So don't be alarmed by that. We just enjoy the silence. Francisco, and then Jeffrey.
Hey Ryan, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So lately I've been in some descriptions, especially open awareness rigpa as being vast. So in your experience, how vast does it feel? Like sometimes they say as the sky, but like the sky is kind of limited. So what are we talking?
So the vastness is the extent of your experiential field. So one of the practices in Dzogchen is to gaze at the sky to generate or to have this sense of vast awakeness.
Mm,
But it's really whatever's present. So it's the presence, the awakeness what's of what is here. So it doesn't have to just be vast. It can be contracted as well. Like in Rigpa, this phone is awake the same way that the vastness of the sky is awake.
hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
can be very vast, especially for example in I am everything or unity consciousness. One of the characteristic marks of that experience is you feel like your mind becomes as vast as the universe. That could be
Mm,
something that happens, but or that is the natural state for a person in I am everything. But
right.
um,
During the metta or the 3 6 hour right, meditation and
yeah,
all that, like it wasn't, I could feel an expansion from the center, going outward, but I'm wondering what's the relationship between this feeling and vastness.
so in specifically in Twim, there is a relationship between the expansion that comes from metta and the first formless jhana, which is realm of infinite space. So that's the relationship.
Okay.
You abide in metta and in the twin system, tranquil wisdom, insight, meditation. You stay with metta as it expands, and that expansion turns into compassion. The compassion then turns, I think, into sympathetic joy. and it empties out into equanimity. And when you get into equanimity, that's when that stable peace, expansiveness really leads to the mind entering the upper formless realms, or the upper jhanas. The first is infinite space. So there's a natural
Mm,
progression from the expansion of metta into the expansion of infinite space.
mm,
Yeah,
okay.
they call them the four, loving kindness, sympathetic joy, compassion, and equanimity. They're called the four immeasurables. Immeasurable in the sense that there's no end or no limit to them, but also immeasurable in the sense that boundlessness becomes one of the experiential characteristics when you're doing that meditation practice. Yeah. The heart opens and there's this natural, like the metta and the compassion and the equanimity just starts to expand outward. And that's part of it's part of the natural letting go of the physical body. So most of our attention, most of our practice, and most of what we're doing has to do with our activities at the physical level, the physical body. So when you enter the jhanas, or the formless realm, there's a kind of receding from the outer layers, and you begin to enter deeper into the mind, you could say. So, yeah, so it's normal. And Twim, actually, when the metta begins to radiate outwards, that's the sign that you're now progressing towards equanimity.
Sorry, can you repeat that? When the metta radiates outwards is the sign that you're not?
That you're progressing towards
Oh,
equanimity.
that you're. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. That was it? Yeah. All right, good. Jeffrey?
Thank you. So my question is, I've cycled through a few stages in my life, and I've become very recently aware that I sabotage like my entire life to get to a point of just, yeah, like career, relationships, pretty much everything. And then I recently, like probably an hour ago, had the realization that I do that to awaken. So metaphorically, like I'll kill the goose to appreciate the egg. And I don't want to do that anymore. And I know I could just stop, but I wonder if there's any wisdom around that.
Yeah, it's a specific point that I touched on a couple of weeks back. I said, as long as spirituality exists to you, you will hate this world. We have this mind. Our mind has the capacity to create designations and labels. So certain areas of our life, uh, we call that spiritual. Certain areas of our interest, we call that spiritual. And then other things, we call them external or worldly. And we tend to have the habit of actually seeing the worldly conditions as obstacles or impediments to our spiritual practice. So because we have a preference for awakening and for spirituality, we're uh, easily inclined to cut off, sabotage, or ruin whatever we think that could get in the way of that or distract us from it. And that's normal. Everyone can hear me, right? Or is it like breaking out? Or you're all good? Yeah, okay. It's interesting though, because awakening is about this cessation of self, right? The cessation of craving, the cessation of greed, and the cessation of illusion. But often, if we're very direct with ourselves and very honest, we'll see that a lot of our activities around awakening are still self-centered. Our awakening and our spiritual pursuit often can still be this feedback loop, or this way to help ourselves, or this way to keep the self in perpetuation, but purely in spiritual terms. So of course the answer is, well, stop doing that, right? And you already mentioned that, but I think a more precise answer is, the only reason we're willing to cut that circumstance or disregard this particular area is because of the preference and the attachment to this area, which is awakening and spirituality. It's really the attachment, the clinging that we have for our spiritual states, our spiritual life, and this awakening itself that is causing so much suffering. One of the a particular maxim in Zen is, whatever stage you've arrived at, destroy it. Whatever level you have attained, surrender it. And that's the only way to really continue in this unfolding of letting go. Wherever it is that we're holding on, and whatever it is that we're holding on to, that's the exact thing to work with. So in my view, it's never the object, it's never the people, it's never the conditions that are the problem. It's our mind that's the problem. We need awakening. That's the problem. So how do we surrender? How do we let this go? I think today a good process for all of us, we can do it at the last 30 minutes of the meditation. We could do a guided feeding your demons with Sultram Alio, and I'll just screen share it and we can all do it together. I think that'd be pretty good. So in the feeding your demon session, some of you can have the demon in front of you be your attachment to awakening, your fixation on spirituality. And that may be quite powerful. It's important to ask, what is it about this awakening thing that we hold on so much to? Why? Is it that it gives us freedom from certain things? Is it that it gives us freedom from certain responsibilities? Is it that it gives us some relief from pain? And some of us deal with quite a bit of meaninglessness and existential crisis. Is spirituality a way to hold on from jumping into the void that has been calling us our entire life? At some point in my life, I realized that it was never anyone else. It was just me. It was never them. It was never the conditions that were the issue. It was just my thoughts and feelings. And at some point, I had to turn around and just charge at the beast. So with preference for spirituality, of course, it makes you a good meditator. You become disciplined with your practice. You can experience special states. But fundamentally, this importance of ourself remains, and that is exactly what begins to fall away in the deeper throes of disidentification and awakening. So often the advice, one student in particular, he is meditating like 3-4 hours a day, which is fine, right? If you have the time to do it and you're in a retreat period. But one of the questions, one of the things that came up was that he was using the power of stillness and the power of samadhi to avoid the intensity of his emotions and the problems with various people he was having in his life. And I asked him, you know, when I say stop meditating, do you feel fear? And he's like, immense amounts of fear. So whatever is you're afraid of, Jeffrey, walk towards it, you know. There's things to learn in attachment, and when it comes to our practice with the integration of presence and the intimacy that we begin to develop with experience and with what's here, we really begin to see that all the relative conditions are awake to, are isn't limited to specific areas. Really, nothing that we do, say, or experience is ever apart from consciousness. But that intimacy is really where that becomes developed. Initially, we only have it on the cushion, but we can begin to bring it into other areas. You know, when you tell your kids, I love you, mean it. You know, when I tell my mother I love her, I do my best to remember to mean it. These little things gradually, power starts to open. And this preference for just the spiritual things, or just the awakening things, it gets gradually starts to fall away. It's really rooted in preference and identification. Yeah, I hope that was a good answer.
No, it was. Thank you. It, like, the part that I don't know somewhat resonated was when you said the part about the Zen tradition. It's like whatever stage you have arrived at, destroy it. And I was like, awesome. I do that subconsciously. Perfect. I'm already there.
Whatever life you think you have, give it up. Okay, so let me read the Cleona, and then we'll get to Muhammad. So
I can ask it, Ryan, if it's easier.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so it's trying to do the inquiry for the first fetter, you know, asking where's the decider or the thinker. But I did a home retreat in August. It's my 4th TWIM retreat. I got the furthest, you know, to quiet mind and things like that. And then after that, I tried to sit every day for 2 hours, a 2-hour sit, which has become now like an hour, 45 minutes because work is busy. But the radiating equanimity I see has led to a massive drop in reactivity and
Yes.
thought being more quiet, which the Theta guide said you should maybe stop meditating because you want that self to get provoked to investigate it. So I was confused. I'm already confused anyway between all the different techniques that exist.
Number one problem of the modern practitioner is too many techniques, too many things to do, too many practices, too many approaches. I remember the pain of not knowing what to do because there were so many methods and so many teachers. So you have to decide, you know, because with TWIM really has their way of approaching it, and they have their specific end goal, which is cessation and the seeing of dependent origination. So if you're interested in that, focus on that. If you want to work with the Fetter model, I'm not familiar with that particular approach, but that's what I would say. It doesn't mean that you need to drop all practices and just do TWIM, right? I'm not saying that, but you want to put the majority of your attention in one bucket, especially if it's with TWIM, because that's how they present their method. You know, they're like, this is the way to do it. Just do this. And in my opinion, what will happen is you'll probably focus more on TWIM. You'll eventually have a cessation, and then you'll realize it's not that big of a deal that you'll go back to the Fetter practice or whatever it was you were doing. So, but But yeah, the reason that 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 TWIM has this approach with equanimity and continuing in that is because you're allowing this sense of self to become more and more transparent through the equanimity, and there's this gradual letting go of form, letting go of feeling, letting go of perception, letting go of memory, letting go of consciousness. In TWIM, you let go all the way until you're in quiet mind, right? And quiet mind is TWIM's word for very, 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 very deep quiet. Your mind is not wandering much and you're not trying to do anything. And the mind then lets go of consciousness. And when it finally lets go of consciousness through one of the three characteristics, suffering, selflessness, or impermanence, then this letting go at a very deep level happens, and the mind is really able to not do anything for extended periods of time. And then, boom, cessation of perception and feeling happens. So if you're interested in TWIM, you had good results with TWIM, work with TWIM until you don't feel like working with it. But it's going to be hard to do TWIM 50% and then this other practice that you're doing 50%.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll stick with TWIM then. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Yeah, you're welcome. And Omar.
Yeah. You spoke about intimacy. And it makes sense, like in the example of when you say, I love you to someone, you can sort of like really feel the feelings and really like feel it. But how, like if you're focusing on the breath or doing mode 2 and mode 3 practice, like how would you have that intimacy? Because I know you said you could either have that intimacy or you can force your way through it. So I'm sort of wondering how that would happen.
So with mode 1 practice, like the breath, what you do is you relax and you allow the sensations of the breath to fully express themselves. It's like you get out of the way, you relax, you surrender, and you allow the breath to be 1000% breath. And staying with that 1000% is what I mean by the intimacy. So the intimacy is referring to the expression of what is arising or what is present. So let's say I'm taking in the visual field right now, and I'm just letting the visual field 1000% be the visual field. I'm not changing the visual field. I'm not interrupting the visual field. I'm just really letting the visual field be what it is. So the intimacy is the beingness of that which is present. It's actually always 1000%. Everything is always fully what it is. All sound exhausts itself completely in the arising of that sound, in the presence of that sound. Every taste exhausts itself completely. Every single aspect of the experiential field is exactly 100 or 1000% what it is. So to relax and to be with that is what I mean by intimacy. So intimacy in regards to saying that you love someone, that's like love intimacy. But by intimacy, I just mean the depth of presence with what is here, the depth of presence with what is arising. That's what I mean by intimacy. So you can breathe intimately, and by that I mean you're really being with the breath, and that comes to the point where there's just breath. Like the intimacy becomes deep enough that you lose your sense of self in what is there.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so that's one way, that's one road. The other, and I'll talk about the other road now, but please, if you're the kind of person who gets like tension headaches, don't follow this advice. And if you're the person that will beat yourself up if you can't reach a certain bar, don't make a big thing out of it. There are certain meditation techniques where it's very difficult to remain with that object unless there's an actual intentional holding of your consciousness, intentional localization. So for example, there's a method that I practice and I teach called Dhammakaya meditation. It requires the visualization of a mental image, like a star or a point of light or a disc. Now, what you find with some practices is that object will keep slipping away unless you actually apply, in my case, significant amounts of effort to stabilize the object. And once the object is stabilized, then there's no impediments. But that road to stabilization, it's like you apply so much effort, it eventually gives way to power. You push so hard that eventually the dam breaks and this whole river of power awakens. It's like Zen, and one of the famous phrases in Zen is intensity without tension. But sometimes the only way to get to intensity without tension is through a lot of tension and intensity. So that's, there's not one way to cut an onion, right? It's just that a way that works very well is to relax and to be and to allow the intimacy to unfold, because there's not so much selfing involved in that. When you're using a concentration object and you have to apply all this tension, if you're not in this non-dual thing, all of that effort's going to come from the personality. All of that effort's going to come from you. So what's going to happen when you aren't able to get into jhana, when you aren't able to enter these deep levels of concentration? You're going to take it personally, like I did. So extremely personally. I can't describe the pain of how it feels to not be able to enter the first jhana. It was crushing, especially on a 90-day retreat. It's one thing if you give like 5-10 days, you give it a shot. It's like, oh, it didn't work out, not a big deal. But when you give this a shot for like a third of a year, and you end up being a miserable failure, it could be pretty crushing. But sometimes you need to be crushed. Sometimes you need to get broken. Sometimes this big, heavy jar that you're holding up, that you're carrying around, that is your spiritual identity. Sometimes you need to fail so hard that you just can't possibly hold that jar up anymore. It falls on the ground, it's cracked, smashes 1,000 pieces. Sometimes that's a good thing. And sometimes it is not. It is really too much. So just saying. Yeah. If you haven't noticed yet, I'm a very extreme person. It's like when I talk about things or I describe how I went about things, it's very much, yeah, very much in the fire. I do not recommend that for everybody. Like for me, I don't mind getting burned. I don't mind dying, but I don't think that's good for everybody. So don't be like your teacher. Know what's right for you, right? You have to know what's right for you. You have to develop your intuition, develop your discernment, get in touch with your gut feelings, your instincts, your guidance, and move your way through this barrage and cosmic swap meet of spiritual practices and states. So let's see who else. Just the sweat emoji. Anyone else? It also doesn't have to be questions. If you just have something that you want to share about what happened in a previous sit, you're more than welcome to. Zoom user. Who is Zoom user? Whoever you are that just raise your hand, you can ask. Oh, Lynn, hey, what's up? You're muted.
Thanks. Hello. I was thinking about maybe if you have any clarity for working with emotions, even before feeding your demons, it feels like they are sensations in the body. More in the past, they were more well, I guess sensations, crying, even screaming, like, you know, I was very dramatic. And over the years, it has become more sensations in the body that run up and down or around. And I'm just wondering if I think there's some disassociation there also, but yeah, if you have any let me see if I have a specific question is maybe that's just a tendency that happens over time, but like, for example, a cry, like sometimes I'll see, even if it's a good cry, like something beautiful, it just kind of slowly wells, feels all right, you know, but then it kind of slowly dissipates and it's a lot of sensations. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, there was a period of time after couple of years after my first opening, my first 10 days of non-dual caused a massive amount of contraction, and I really entered this abyss, or I call it the abyss. And one of the characteristic feelings of the abyss was not being able to feel anything. So with sensations in general, and with working with feelings in this practice, it's important to just stay with what is appearing. So like if that emotion of crying comes up, it doesn't need to be directed in any way, right? Like you don't necessarily have to make yourself cry more or cry less, but you just really feel into what is present. And if it becomes more sensate and less emotional, it becomes more physically sensitive, then you just stay with that. So one of the issues that I had was I would have intense feelings, but then it was like the feelings would get short circuited by this numbness. And so initially I was like, oh, well, it just went away. But when I inquired deeper and I looked and felt deeper, when I felt deeper, I found that numbness was actually a psychological barrier that my mind would generate to circumvent the amount of pain I was feeling. So the way that I worked with that was to just stay with the numbness. Like not being able to feel anything is still a feeling. It's just not feeling. It's like you're feeling this buffer. Right? Not feeling something is still feeling something, is essentially what I'm saying. So with whatever is coming up for you, you and I can talk later about the specifics of the given, sensations or what's going on. But it's normal. Some meditators, some people, they just have a more sensitive energy body. Like some people, they meditate for 10, 15 years. They never have these strange energetic sensations, but other people, they're having them even before they start meditating. They'll feel fire in their body. This like energy will rotate up their back and down the front of their body. They'll have all kinds of unusual things happen. And those are just side effects of awakening and spiritual work in general. So, the experience of that some people feel when they meditate and they get still, that there's this like subtle rotation that begins happening. That's called the there's a channel of energy that goes from the perineum and the genital region up the back of the spine, over the top of the head, and it terminates at the tip of their tongue. That's called the governing vessel. And the conception vessel is the channel that goes from, down their head to the roof of their mouth. Then the conception vessel begins at the tip of the tongue, and it goes down to the genital region into the perineum. So these are, in traditional Chinese medicine, these are the two most major meridians in the entire body. So it's normal to have sensations moving in these particular ways. And the general advice in meditation is that if it's not causing you issues, like if it's not painful, and if it's not if it's not causing any problems, then just proceed with your inquiry, or proceed with your letting be. Yeah, it's not an issue. Like if it's not hurting, if it's not, if it's not making you do anything weird, then it's all good. But it's, of course, it's alarming. The first time one time I was doing standing meditation, Taoist style meditation, and I literally felt a fire ascend from my heel up the back of my leg, around my hip, and into my navel center. So when things like that happen, they're very strange. It's like, what is this? But it's just energy phenomena. You have a etheric and energetic substructure to your physical body. All of your physical organs have corresponding non-physical organs that are called chakras. And those have their specific functions and sensations. If a person tunes into them or begins to experience those, it's not anything to worry about. Yeah, the only caveat is when something becomes so intense that it begins to cause pain or it begins to cause issues, then you have to be flexible and find a way to deal with that. Yeah. But if it's just sensation, it's just sensation. It's okay. Like sometimes when you do metta, you have this feeling of literally your heart cracking open. It's like the heart actually has to break in order to expand. It's perceived limitations, it's perceived perceived size essentially has to crumble in order to expand. So when some people do metta initially, it hurts. So in a lot of traditions, they recommend forgiveness practice. Yeah, you work on forgiveness in order to do more of that. And that's not specific to you, but I'm just saying for everyone, right? If you have an issue with metta or with loving kindness for yourself or for other people, the solution to that is to approach it with forgiveness, or to take a forgiveness lens on the heart practice. Yeah, there's a reason inside that you can't give yourself that love. So that needs to be addressed. Jeffrey, I love your hair, man, by the way. It's awesome.
Thanks.
I used to have long hair in high school, like down to my chest, so it was reminiscent. Yeah. Have you read Emptiness Yoga? On the shelf? Yes. It's on Madhyamaka by Jeffrey Hopkins. So it's on the middle way philosophy of Sankapa. Sankapa, I don't know exactly how to say his name. He's the founder of the Gelug school. Yeah. It's definitely a philosophy text. Yeah. So I got about like halfway through it and I was like, okay, I think I've had enough. There's only so many times, so many different ways to say all phenomena are empty. So So the one of the questions was about how how to experience something 1,000%. Intimacy was a way, effort was a way. Another good word is commitment, which is not necessarily effort. You know, effort is really this application, this pushing. But commitment just means to just be with that in a way that you're not allowing your mind to go elsewhere, or when it does, you just come back to it very, very quickly. Commitment, giving yourself completely to what you're doing. It doesn't mean that the force needs to be used, but it does mean that you really put your heart into what you're doing. So it means you can walk with commitment, you can breathe with commitment, you can eat with commitment. So it just means that from this power and place of the heart, you really give yourself totally to what you're doing. And when you give yourself totally, when you surrender yourself totally to action, there can be this opening of non-duality. The core of our issues, you know, spiritual and otherwise, is really this point of identification. There's no difference between the consciousness of an ordinary being and the consciousness of a awakened being, or a Buddha. The only difference is the presence of identification and the degree of that presence. You could see for example, in the Theravadan model, there's 4 stages of awakening: stream entry, once returner, non-returner, arahant. I'll explain what those things mean. In the original early Buddhist map of these things, how it would go was, if you experienced no self, or you touched nirvana. That's another thing too. Nirvana is defined differently depending on the sect, right? So let's put that aside, and let's just say if you experience nirvana, there's a certain falling away of self that happens as a result of that automatically. You could see it as the first level is 25% identity vanished. Second stage is 50% identity vanished. Third stage is 75% identity vanished. And then the fourth, the final stage, is 100% identity vanished. The whole point of suffering really comes down to this identity structure, this self. If there's really, really, truly no self present, there would be no way to get frustrated, no way to get angry. And you know, there's many spiritual teachers, even some of the big ones, they say, well, there's no self, but you know, anger is just getting angry. And I feel that to be a little disingenuous. I mean, if there's really nothing there, then there's nothing that would get angry. You know, there has to be a basis for that reactivity. There has to be a basis for that reaction. In the traditional 4-path model, stream entry means you'd only return to a human existence at most 7 more times. You've entered the stream of awakening, and you are now hurling towards cessation of craving and full liberation. The second stage is called sakadagami, which means once returner. So you come back to the human realm or another human existence 1 more time. And the third stage is anagami. So that means that you would no longer return to a human realm or a human existence or reality, and you would continue your understanding in the pure abodes, which are these pure land dimensions where beings are still able to practice. And from there, then a person would extinguish craving and samsara would collapse. The final stage is arahant, which means that the craving and clinging, the final fetters of ignorance and conceit, which is I, those completely fall away. And now there's no more fuel for continued rebirth. That's the idea. The path is really the cessation of fuel, the cessation of those karmic and subtle formations that give rise or allow for the arising of craving and clinging. So they say after a person becomes an arahant, it's still possible to suffer, like get sick, die, have conditions occur that would end one's life or make the physical incarnation difficult. But those are all past karmas, and the mind of the arahant is no longer generating new karmas. They're no longer generating intentions that come with actual craving and clinging. Like those structures have vanished. It's a big claim, you know. Does it really exist? Do arahants actually exist? Is this a for real thing? I don't blame you. So, but however the four-path model is presented, or whatever model or map of awakening is presented, they're all characterized by things that fall away. They're all generally characterized by these quote grosser or more worldly responses and aspects of experience which begin to cease or begin to fall away. So the entire, not even just this world, but beings in general in existence are subject to craving, and they're attempting to get, achieve, attain, or grasp something. There's always this craving, this movement. So when the Buddha had his awakening, he said, I have seen the house builder craving. Craving is the house builder of cyclic existence. Everyone wants something. Everyone needs something. All beings need and want things, even non-humans. You know, if you've ever observed small animals like chipmunks, for example, squirrels, you see that they're just responding to the environment. When it's cold, they look for conditions that would reduce the degree of cold they're experiencing. If there's going to be scarce food, they try to collect as much food as they can. They collect things that make their existence more enjoyable. They naturally are averse to pain or to conditions that would terminate their existence. Seems pretty familiar. Yeah. They attempt to procreate, or they do procreate. So a lot of our, what we consider, human afflictions are purely the results of being biological organisms. Even animals get jealous. If you've ever raised pets, you know that animals get jealous. When you give, I have a cat. It was my sister's cat. I inherited it, and she was just her life as she was the only cat at first, and then another cat came along, and it's been like 5 years, and she hates and hisses at that cat every single day. It's like her brother cat, and then the brother never retaliates, never does anything back. He's like twice as big. and she always hisses at him, always tries to start fights with him. And to every other being, she's nice. You know, she has no problems with any other cats. I've even seen her hang out with raccoons. Very strange. Yeah, just come outside, just hanging out with like 5 raccoons. They're just chilling, having a party by the pool. And she gets along fine with the raccoons. They're a completely different species, but for whatever reason, her brother, she doesn't like him. And it's because she still remembers that, you know, the attention was taken away from her. She was no longer the child once the other cat came along. Maybe she doesn't consciously remember it. Maybe she just like, maybe there's just a stream of like, I don't like this cat. I don't like this other cat. I don't know. I don't know what cat perception's like. But my point is that a lot of these human afflictions are biological. I mean, I doubt the animals are really capable of hatred or things like this. But yeah, jealousy. We observe that in animals, attempting to avert or reduce physically difficult conditions. All organisms do that. So it's important to consider with our spiritual practice and with our life in general, because we often beat ourselves up for behaving in certain ways, and you know, sometimes a lot of times things are rooted in trauma and rooted in neglect and things that we suffered. But in other cases, if a guy's running at you with a knife, it's totally the biological response to get alarmed and brace for violence, right? So when a person becomes, as this process of awakening deepens, these mechanisms that are so intrinsic to the biological organism, these responses that are intrinsic to the organism begin to fall to the wayside. It's possible for anger to reduce. It's possible for these tendencies to fall away, because we are animals. We are biological organisms, but we also have pretty highly advanced consciousness. One of the, in my opinion, pitfalls of spiritual orientation and this whole, you know, life and the Dharma and practice is that we can take advice like the advice that I've just given, and you can say to yourself, you know what, I'm not going to allow myself to get angry anymore. And you can shut the door to suffering out of this, with this suppression that will begin to result. And that's really not healthy. You know, although suffering is falling away, I wouldn't say that you shut the door to things that make you suffer. And the reason for that is because suffering reduces our sense of self. It humbles us. It thins us. It can clarify if you allow it. You know, I'll give you an example. I was a very different person before my dad passed away. Right. When I was 20, I had to watch my dad's final moments of his life. And so many things I learned in that moment, or I learned in that period and in the period that followed. But also so many things fell away immediately. Just poof. You know, before he died, I was like always competing with my best friend Ricardo as to who could meditate longer, and you know, who was the better practitioner and all this stuff. I compared myself to other people so much. You know, on that retreat, I wasn't able, on that retreat earlier that year, I wasn't able to enter the first jhana, and it really really was crushing. You know, I had so many of these self-fixations running. And when he died, so much of that just stopped. You know, one of the issues that I had was, you know, my dad had drug problems, so growing up and growing into my teen years, he wasn't as present as he was when I was a kid. So I really missed him, even though he's in the same house. You know, sometimes I think one year living in the same house, we said no more than like 10 words to each other. And I was furious, so angry, getting in fights, beating people up, getting beaten up, all kinds of trouble. And I let that anger, I let my hatred get between us. And so when he died, it hit me so hard. I was like, wow, I made some fundamental assumptions here. One, I assumed that somehow everything would be okay and he would change. I assumed that we would all sit down as a family, have the conversation we needed to have, tell them that we love them, send them off to rehab, and they would all be fine. Yeah, I assumed that we would have more time. And wow, was I wrong. You know, there's some of you, you know, a lot of you, your life's good. You know, I have nothing to say. But for some of you that have talked to me, you know, don't assume that you have time. If things aren't right with your parents, do your best to forgive them and work through that. But whatever it is that's not resolved, try to resolve it. Because once the mark has passed, once the clock has struck, once the glass has shattered, it's over. That rage, that anger that I had, I realized so clearly what a waste of time it was. Just one of the biggest epiphanies of my life. I was like, wow, in the face of death, it means nothing. Literally nothing. Just so small when you look at it from the point of view of, I might not have another year with that person. I might not have another year to patch things up and say the things that I want to say. It's hard to say the things that you want to say. That's why you haven't said them. It's hard to do the things that you know you need to do but haven't done. It's hard. That's why you don't do it. Because it's really, really hard. But consider the consequences. Consider the regret. Consider the lost hope. Consider how if you don't fix that, that it'll just fester. Some of us are very blessed. We have this thing called guidance or intuition. We know when we're supposed to walk through a certain door. You know, the lines aren't crossed, the gate opens, and everything is like go. You know, or leave, right? Could be leave, to leave a job, to leave a relationship, to leave whatever it is. And we really feel in our heart that's what we're supposed to do. but we let our thoughts get in the way. We let what if get in the way. And some opportunities, some doors, they're only open for so long. And sometimes a gift is given to you, like a talent or an art or a power. Literally a power is given to you. And if you don't use it, the universe will hand it to someone else. So for anyone who's been sitting on a project, sitting on a thing that they were guided to do, sitting and the door is open, just looking at it, just staring at it, staring at the knob, looking at the door sill, not distracting yourself, looking out the window, but the door is still right there in your peripheral vision. It's always tough to walk through the door, but who you were on this side has to end in order for you to become who you're supposed to be on that side. Who you are here in time dissolves, is let go of, in order for the you of the future to be born. In the non-dual teachings, they I guess they don't talk about destiny anymore, but Vedic astrology is destiny. Chinese astrology is destiny. That's what destiny is. And it has become clear to me that every person does have a dharma to fulfill. Maybe it's easier to say, oh, everything's the absolute, everything's non-dual, nothing matters. And even if that is true from the absolute perspective, we shouldn't use that as a justification to not do the things we're called to do, or to not take responsibility. The absolute teachings or these non-dual teachings, they're often within a framework. So in the Bhagavad Gita, for example, it's in the framework of right action, in the framework of duty, in the framework of dharma, at the relative level, the stages of yoga, the limbs of yoga, the different forms of yoga, bhakti, raja. So bhakti is devotion, raja is concentration. These are all different paths to samadhi, which is this absolute beyond relative conditions and perspectives thing that I often talk about. But don't let that circumvent dealing with your problems. Yeah, I'll share one last story, and then we can all start to sit. So some of I have these very interesting out-of-body experiences. And one of them was in India. I was in India and I went to go see the 4 major Buddhist sites in February. So where the Buddha was born, in Lumbini, where he first taught the Dharma, in Varanasi, where he died, in Kushinagar, and then where he became enlightened under the Bodhi tree. So this was a pilgrimage, and it was just me, Delson Armstrong, and a tour guide. And so we go through all the sites, and towards the end of the trip, I had this out-of-body experience where I call them simulations. So in out-of-body states or in dreams, there's a type of dream that is basically a training program. And what is happening is that the guiding intelligence or deeper nature is attempting to get you to elicit a specific choice, a specific response in that simulation. So in my case, I was placed in a random living room with 3 other brothers and an alcoholic father. And the objective, the intuitive sense I had in this was that I had to tell the alcoholic father, look, I love you, but I can't stay here anymore. You know, I can't be around this. I have to go. And the person in this dream, it wasn't me as Ryan there. You're thrown into this simulation. It's there to see if your subconscious impressions will still act out the appropriate response. So I'm in there, and I get it right, and I tell the father, hey, I love you, but I can't stay here anymore. I have to go and become a man, and staying with you is just not going to do it. And so when I left, or when I said that to him, the simulation broke. So that means the whole dream thing disappears. You're in this metal room essentially, and this beam comes into my head, and it provides an entire download, which intuitive knowledge directly, like in a split second, went something along the lines of this. Just like how specific choice responses are elicited in the dream simulations or in the out-of-body experiences, various conditions will appear in the waking state in order for you to also make specific growth or choice responses. The simulations in the dreamscape and the simulations in the out-of-body states are preparations for events and conditions that will occur in the waking state, or that already have occurred. So it's this meta or outside time sort of phenomena as well. The incarnate will be presented with the same person, the same condition, the same affliction, the same problem again and again and again, until the right growth response or the right choice is made. Once the specific choice is made, the simulation breaks and a lesson is derived. So pretty much another way of looking at this is, you will, in modern terms, is you will attract the same kind of person, the same kind of partner, the same kind of toxicity again and again and again, the same scenario, because the lesson is not being derived. It's like, see it in a way, it's like life is attempting to teach me or teach you something, and until that lesson is understood, the proximate condition for that lesson will be presented again and again and again. Maybe the reason that we're open to toxicity and that we're willing to endure abuse is because we hate ourselves. Maybe the lesson is that if I heal this self-hatred, I won't tolerate that treatment anymore. I won't let people talk to me like that anymore. I won't run back to them if they treat me like that anymore. But until the lesson is learned, until it's derived, until it's integrated, you don't have the understanding that will prevent you from going there, from going back to that person, from going back to that job, from recreating those conditions again and again and again. It is wisdom that breaks the wheel. It is wisdom that breaks this cycle of habitual tendencies and responses. We have to learn. Oftentimes the same thing will come up because we're being taught, hey, this is something to let go of. If you've always needed a partner your whole life, or you've always needed someone to be there in that regard, one of the things that you may be faced with is not having someone there. Like there's this guy, maybe I should be alone for a while. Maybe that'd be a good thing. So you're given a choice. That's the simulation. The simulation is now, you're about to enter this simulation of aloneness and everything that can be learned there. But you're like, okay, actually that sucks, and I don't want to experience something that sucks. So I'm going to choose simulation B. And there, of course, it's a person that isn't too good for you. And you end up hurt. So life is like that. Everything at the relative level are these lesson simulations. And we all know this, when we look back, we often feel that what was most valuable was the things that we learned. And even though non-duality is the case, and none of this ever happened, blah blah, it's all consciousness, sure. But you'll see, if you live with teachers, if you've lived and been around someone in this state for long enough, that they also have challenges, they also have things they need to deal with, they also respond either reflexively, skillfully, or they don't. Make a mistake. It's possible, I've been around teachers where they're very awakened, and after something happened, they were like, yeah, I think we could have done that differently. So in hindsight. So just a thing to consider. Whatever comes out of my mouth is provisional. You don't have to take anything I say as the truth. You don't have to do anything that I recommend. I don't care what you practice. I don't care what you believe. It doesn't make a difference to me. It's irrelevant. Yeah. Awakening isn't given. It's pointed out. With all this, it wasn't like my teachers handed me something that I didn't have. They only helped me see what I already was. And a lot of you, the main question is like, how do I awaken? Like, how do I enter this thing that I hear the teachers talking about, that you're talking about? Like, how do I get into this? And the answer is always the same, which is that you're already consciousness, which is already awake. There's just not a recognition of that. So the only practice I give you is recognition. And practice, the only thing I tell you to do is notice what is. And gradually this orientation from what is not, and from the illusions, and from the narrative personality hamster wheel, fixation on that this fixation on that falls away. And then the fuel that keeps that hamster wheel running, the craving, the clinging, the trying, the obsessive, I need it this way, I want it now. It's this veil of identity that is the only thing in the way. So I tell everyone to feel the awakeness of the identity, to see how the identity, the striving, the reaching itself is awake. The same way that seeing is awake, the same way that hearing is awake, the same way that feeling is awake, the same way that consciousness is awake. This little I is also awake. Just another part of the field. That's why it's not a big deal. And when the fuel, our fixation on it, falls to the wayside as a result of more noticing and more presence, It's like the voices, that solidity comes thinner, quieter, quieter. And in relation to its cessation is, quote, progression on the path. But in this awakeness, there is no development. This is the absolute point. The identity structure is awake the same way the seeing is awake. It's all awake, and in the awakeness, in the presence of experience, we never get more or less mind. Nothing that we do gets us more mind. Nothing that we avoid or don't do gets us less mind. Experience is present uninterruptedly, irrespective of what is done. That is, the realization of that is power. So, okay, I've spoken enough. So let's do this feeding your demons session. This is gonna be wild. I'm gonna stop the recording.